Shah says in his memoirs to come out soon that the West underestimated the impact of his fall, that they did not ever realize how important it would be to the West. Is that accurate?
There's no question that the Shah leaving Iran is a tragedy, a personal tragedy for him, a tragedy for the people of Iran who now are suffering repression much greater than they had before, who have 4 million at least unemployed and runaway inflation under a government that is not really a government, it's really a mob. All these things have happened, but also it was, in addition to being a personal tragedy for the Shah, a tragedy for the people of Iran, it was certainly a tragedy for what we call the West, because what was leadership and stability in that part of the world is now replaced by instability.
Welcome back, America. That was Richard Nixon at the funeral of the Shah of Iran in Egypt, which he chose to attend. I'm joined now by Clifford May, president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracy. Cliff, I played Richard Nixon at the Shah's funeral in 1979. He laid it all out. This is not a surprise that we are where we are. What do we do next?
Look, right now, the U.S. needs to have deterrence, and we do not have deterrence. Deterrence means, first of all, that you have a capability that your enemies see as overwhelming, and that you have the will to use that capability, and so they don't want to challenge you. And I should say deterrence comes in two forms. There's deterrence by denial and deterrence by punishment. Deterrence by denial is what the Israelis did. They said, you can't get those missiles to hit their targets. All right, you're not going to be allowed. But then your enemy says, okay, well, we'll try again, see what we can do. Deterrence by punishment says, if you hurt us, we will make you scream. You do not want to hurt us. There is nothing more important for the U.S. as a whole right now, I think, than to reestablish deterrence with its enemies, which we don't have. We don't have them, and we certainly don't have in the current administration a sense of will, a sense of we can hurt you and are willing to hurt you. We did deterrence failed as far as Putin in Russia. Deterrence has failed. Certainly with Iran, it's not enough to say don't. They have to fear what you say don't. But that means something else, I would argue, and that's recognizing that we're in a Cold War. That Cold War is being led by the strongest, richest, most powerful communist regime ever in history, and it has as its junior partners Vladimir Putin in Moscow, Ali Khamenei in Tehran. It also has North Korea. It also has Cuba. It also has Venezuela. If such a Cold War is taking place and it's more challenging than the last Cold War, well, we have to be on a Cold War footing. And we're by no means. The military's being cut. The Navy's being cut. We're spending trillions of dollars on a transition to green energy, which is not so green. And we're spending not nearly enough or doing enough militarily in order to deter our enemies or to win a Cold War or even keep the Cold War from getting hot. How do you keep a Cold War from getting hot? By making your enemies and adversaries fear going to war with you. And that's not the situation we're in.
Cliff, we're going to keep you after the break and play it tomorrow morning and also put in the podcast. But I want to ask one thing for our radio audience that's listening right now. When did you start and when did you leave at the New York Times?
So I was in the New York Times during the 1980s.
So you were there for Reagan.
You just mentioned. I was there. Yeah, I was there for Reagan. I guess. Let's see. I was there from let me think. I was there from about the age of 30 to the age of 39, and I'm now 73. So that we can figure that out.
All right.
And at a certain point, I left because the New York Times was sliding to the left, and I was sort of getting opinionated. As a young reporter, I was not terribly opinionated. I really wanted to know what everybody had to say.
Cliff, the reason I asked if you were at the Times when Reagan was president is because Reagan began to rebuild deterrence with Richard Nixon's book, The Real War Under His Arm, by a small but winnable war in Grenada. We have a small but winnable war with the Houthis right now. It's astonishing to me that this is going on. Do you think Team Biden will do anything to stop it as opposed to merely continue to spend money and missiles knocking him down?
Yeah, I'm afraid he won't. I'm afraid this constant repetition of the phrase, we don't want to escalate. We want to hold this in check. There is a real problem with the U.S. and really with the West in general of not wanting to win wars, of not thinking war should be won, of not using words like victory for us or defeat for our enemies, so that I think Biden capitulated to the Taliban in Afghanistan. I think that we went a pretty long way in Iraq and then decided we were okay to just have an exit strategy and let ISIS take over and let Iran come into Iraq, and we're still fighting that situation. Look, even the Korean War, and there were good reasons, we didn't win that war. That war didn't end. It was an armistice. The result of that is that today we have North Korea, a dynastic dictatorship that is very much in league with our adversaries, particularly Communist China, but also very much with Russia and also very much with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And they helped build a nuclear facility in Syria that the Israelis tried to, in fact, did bomb against American advice, if you'll recall. So yes, if we can get back to a Reagan policy, that would make a lot of sense in this world.
Well, Trump began to do that when he took out and ordered Soleimani killed. That was the beginning of a rebuild of deterrence versus Iran. Iran told us they were going to bomb al-Assad. The people who were on al-Assad at the time, including my son, didn't much care for that. But it was forewarned is forearmed, and they got out of there with 45 minutes to spare. I am just curious. Do you think Trump had restored deterrence? Do you think that Hamas would have attacked or Iran would have attacked Israel if Trump had been president?
Look, I think it's always hard to do hypotheticals, but I think there's a real possibility that he would have said, when he said don't, people would have been frightened that he would do it. If nothing else, he was unpredictable. Yes. And a lot depends on who's advising him. I think, look, Mike Pompeo, I think, has a very Reagan-esque view of American foreign policy. I think the same of H.R. McMaster. I don't think that of Tony Blinken. I don't think that of Jake Sullivan right now. And I think the other thing, one thing that should have become clear, I don't know if it has, from the attacks over the weekend, is that Iran has been at war. Not Iran, really, the Islamic Republic of Iran, not the Iranian people. This regime has been at war with Israel and with America for 45 years. Just before I came to the Times in 1979, I was a young reporter in Iran covering the revolution. And the important thing that I did take away, that I did understand, a lot of my compatriots didn't, is this was not an Iranian revolution. It was an Islamic revolution. This was not about the Shah and how cruel it was. It was rather that the supreme leader, Khamenei, Ruhollah Khamenei, wanted to establish a new Islamic empire because the Ottoman Empire had failed after the First World War. They didn't call it a caliphate, they called it an imamate because they're Shia. But that's what this was about. This was about a new Islamic empire rising and challenging and bringing down the West, the Judeo-Christian West. That's what that revolution was about. People still don't understand that, and it's what it's still about. It's still, when they say death to Israel and death to America, that's what they mean.
The person who did understand, you were in Iran, which may have been the best seat. I had the second best seat in the world for the Iranian Revolution because it was the office of former President Nixon at the Elba of America in San Clemente. And we were working on the book, The Real War. And we'd have the TV on and we'd look up and we'd see the mobs marching. He would shake his head and said, they have no idea what is coming. That is one of two pillars in the Middle East, the other being Saudi Arabia. We talking about Muslim countries, not Israel. And he knew what would happen. It was predictable. What wasn't predictable is the foreign minister of Iran just threatened Israel, that they will respond within seconds if Israel strikes Iran. What that does, I think, Cliff, is push Israel towards having to strike the homeland of Iran. Otherwise, they will have changed the equation. Do you agree with me on that assessment?
Yeah, I think the Israelis can and should act strategically. And by that, I mean, I'm sure President Biden is saying we're going to do all kinds of things diplomatically and take a breath and see. For example, the U.S. could snap back sanctions. The U.S. has the power to do that, should have done that a long time ago, so you're not funding both the missiles coming at Israel and the F-15s shooting down those missiles, which is what we're doing. In both that war and the Russia-Ukraine war, we're funding both sides. It's not a very good idea. So see what Biden does diplomatically, see what he does in terms of new sanctions and to squeeze the economy. Revenge or escalation can be a dish eaten cold, after all. And then the Israelis also have to think, we would like to restore deterrence. That's important. Most important thing to do, we have to think how to do this, is not let this regime have nuclear weapons, because if those missiles that had been coming in over the weekend had a nuclear warhead, that would have been a much more serious situation. It only takes, as Ahmadinejad, former president of Islamic Republic, said, it only takes one atomic bomb to wipe out Israel.
Cliff, let's
so
stop
they
there for a
need to
second,
think
because the clarity window is closing. What I mean by that is, immediately after the attack on Israel, the clarity window was wide open and everyone saw what happened. Every day anyone delays, the clarity window closes. We saw that after 10/7. If they don't hit the Iranian nuclear sites today, I can't imagine under what circumstances we'll ever hit them. Can you? I mean, they're right up to the edge. They're in the breakout mode. If we don't do it now, or if Israel doesn't do it now, we'll never do it.
Well, first of all, the U.S. should do it. This is an international responsibility. The U.S. is the leader of the free world. This is a threat to the free world. That should be done by the U.S., with the Israelis perhaps helping no more. I don't see Biden doing that. From an Israeli point of view, yes, they should do that. But there is a question, you and I don't have the answer to it, of capabilities. Can the Israelis destroy or even set back the nuclear program for 3 to 5 years? Do they have the capabilities in place at this moment? There are difficulties with if they're going to do it via bombers, if they're going to do it, they have to, there's a lot of airspace questions. If they're going to do it with submarines, they only have so many. You have to think they're considering the various capabilities they have. They don't want to try it and fail. That's for sure. I would love to see them do something really creative. I once had a very high Israeli official tell me, in this and other cases, we were speaking this, he said, Cliff, if we do something and you say, yeah, that's what I expected them to do, then in a sense we failed. What has to happen is we do something and you and people like you say, oh, I never thought they would do that.
Yeah, I was listening to your podcast, which is Foreign Policy, and you told me about it in the green room at Fox, and thanks for the shout out on that. But I don't need shout outs. I want people to listen to Foreign Policy. It was fascinating. I think you had on the former national security advisor in Israel. You might have had Peter Ruff on. I can't remember if Duran was on there or not. But I get them all mixed up. But someone was, someone tell me if they have, does Israel have ballistic missiles that can reach Iran? That's a factual question.
I believe they do, but reaching Iran doesn't mean they can hit they don't have bunker busters. How deep they can go. You don't want to just hit the top and have, 100 feet of concrete or rock and stone between the facility and where the explosives land.
Well, I don't know about that, Cliff. I'm not an expert on any of this stuff, but it would seem to me that if you put either F-35 munitions on the top of the tunnels at a few of these things, you're going to interrupt their program for at least a little bit. And when the world doesn't blow up, that will be a message to the United States. At least that's how I think about it.
I think, listen, it's a good theory, and we have experts on missiles and warfare, people like, as you know, like Admiral Mark Montgomery, and Brad Bowman, and also Behnam Ben Taleblu, who study this stuff in depth. You and I can be sure that the Israelis are thinking about it, and I do think they understand that they have a list of threats. They have tactical threats, they have strategic threats, and they have an existential threat. Because the existential threat, of course, is from the nuclear weapons. And they would like to see the U.S. take care of that problem, since the U.S. has, in a sense, aided and abetted it for years. But if they have to protect themselves, they will. They need to look at the strategy that has the greatest chance of success. It's not, as they say, a slam dunk, and it's a funny phrase to use in this particular
I want to wrap it.
context.
Admiral Montgomery is going to join me tomorrow, Cliff, and I had Jonathan Shazler. I'm just going to become an annex of the FDD here, and that's fine. I want everyone to know about the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. So Monty will be on tomorrow, but let's talk about Lebanon for a moment. I had an Israeli veteran of their forces call in, and I asked him if Israel goes into Lebanon as part of a comprehensive set of responses, and I mean goes in like they did in 1982 without the massacre, like they did the second time, the second Lebanon war, and they clear everything out to the Litani, and they They don't suffer too much as a result. They got all the warships there. The defense in depth is still there. He thought more than double the number of casualties for the IDF in Lebanon as in Gaza. Can Israel absorb that? Do you think the government would the coalition government would hold together through that kind of a war?
Look, I think that the Israelis, on a consensus basis, realize that the threat from Lebanon will have to be addressed. Part of what they're trying to do now, this gets back to what we're talking about, is sequence. What do they need to finish up in Gaza? How soon can they do it? How hard is that going to be with Biden, who, as you know, has not been good on this? When do they want to do Lebanon, and what do they need to do about Iran, which is the head of the octopus with all its tentacles? Do I think that the Israeli has a military large enough and powerful enough to be fighting in Gaza, fighting in Lebanon, and fighting Iran at the same time? I think that's stretching it a lot. I think they need to, and I think they will, strategize, sequence, consider the various range of threats and put them in a hierarchy and deal with them that way. We can think it through, but probably, I would hope, not as well as they think it through in their war cabinet.
All right, Cliff, I want to close
But
this
it needs
way.
to be done because there are tens of thousands of displaced Israelis in the north. But right now, because of the rocketing coming from southern Lebanon, and that has to be addressed. And I think it has to be addressed before kids need to go back. People need to go back to their homes in the north. Kids need to go to school. There's a lot here to think about. But I think the big takeaway from all this should be for all of us, when you're watching these people march in the street for Palestine, there's a war being fought against Israel on the front lines. There's a war being fought against the U.S. The Islamic Republic of Iran declared that war back in 1979, and now the Islamic Republic of Iran is in a partnership with Communist China, neo-imperialist Russia, and with all their other allies, such as North Korea and Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela.
Okay, Cliff, I'm going to throw you a very hard and inside pitch because it's hard to answer. There are serious people about national security. You have a bunch of them at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and we'll talk to all of them. Then there's Club Appeasement, the Model UN national security team that we've got over at the White House, and I think with David Cameron and Rishi Sunak, who think the world can be talked into coexisting. The first group sits around, studies, and talk. Where does the worldview of never escalate come from? I mean, how does that even develop? Wendy Sherman is like their poster child. She did the 1994 agreement with Korea. She did the JCPOA. She's back at the Blinken State Department. Now she's criticizing Israel from the outside. Where does that worldview come from? It's untethered to anything, and it has been since Thucydides.
This gets back to the very beginning of FDD, and the week before 9/11, there I am talking to Jean Kirkpatrick. You know who she was. I hope your viewers and listeners, right? And Jack Kemp, and they said America is taking a holiday from history. We're taking a peace dividend prematurely. And they were thinking of what we came to call jihadists, those who had attacked us in New York City in 1993, attacked us in Lebanon in 1983, attacked us at Khobar Towers in 96, blew up two of our embassies in 98, attacked the USS Cole in 2000. Here's the one difference. Back then, we thought, I think all of us thought, yeah, we have a real threat from terrorists, from jihadists, from the segment of the Islamic world. But China is going to be a good stakeholder in the international system. Remember, in 2001, Clinton brought them into the World Trade Organization. We're going to help make them rich. When they get rich, they'll get liberal and moderate, and they'll like us. That's going to work out just fine. Russia, Putin will be okay. Surely the Soviet Union collapsed. The Berlin Wall fell. So back then, when the FDD formed just after the attacks of 9/11, We thought we had a jihadist threat, but no other. Now, today, the international threat matrix is much more complex and worse because, oddly enough, the jihadists are in league with the strongest communist nation in the world and with Russia, which is neo-imperialist. Putin is trying to restore the great empire. He sees himself as a latter-day czar. And then there are all the others who hate America. And by the way, they're getting support from countries like South Africa now, which is a shame, but it's also the case. They're all trying to bring down what they sometimes call the U.S.-led world order, the idea of international law. The UN has become a cesspool. It was supposed to be uphold all of this, and we're not facing any of those facts. And we need to deal with this, I think, holistically. Look at the situation, look at the world as it is, and the world as we wish it to be secure for Americans and for other free countries, for our allies.
But Cliff, where does that other worldview come from?
It's constant. It's certainly the Chamberlain view. Imagine if Churchill had died fighting in South Africa or in Sudan, how would World War II have ended? Probably not the way it did. You always had this view. It's a very seductive view that our enemies, and you saw it, by the way, in Rishi Sunak's most recent statement, which was supportive of Israel, but also nobody wants bloodshed. I'm sorry, there are those who want bloodshed. That's what terrorists are all about. The Islamic Republic wants bloodshed. Russia wants bloodshed. Plenty of people want. We have this view. Everybody wants to compromise. Everybody thinks peace is better. Everybody wants a good 401k and a health care plan. Ideology is not to be taken seriously, whether it's communist ideology or whether it's jihadist ideology. That's partly a lack of imagination on our part. We don't think about people being different from us, and some absolutely are. So we think we'll enrich them, we'll make them offers, we'll give them a half a loaf. Remember Obama, his strategy in the Middle East was sort of, I used to call it the Mr. Rogers strategy. Everybody's going to share the neighborhood.
Yep.
Oh, of course. Everybody, yeah, that's fine. Okay, we'll just share the neighborhood.
It doesn't work. But someday you would think. Clifford May, I'm going to let you go. I've kept you long. Foreign Policy is your podcast. It's fabulous. I want more of them, Cliff. I want more of them. Not fewer of them, more of them.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, my friend. Be well. See you soon. In the green room near here and back on the radio. Clifford May, Foundation for the Defense of Democracy. Thank you.